Transylvania, winter 1920. Snow settles on red tile roofs and white stone walls, a medieval fortress perched on a cliff above the Bran Gorge. 4 towers rise from a central courtyard where a well drops nearly 200 feet into solid rock. The castle commands the mountain pass between 2 worlds, Transylvania to the north, Wallachia to the south, as it has for more than 5 centuries. Inside, rooms sit empty. Dust gathers on window ledges. The fortress that once guarded trade routes and collected customs has been abandoned by everyone except foresters and woodsmen who shelter in its crumbling chambers. The walls are solid, the foundations are strong, but no one wants it anymore. Then a woman arrives. Queen Marie of Romania, granddaughter of Queen Victoria, wife of King Ferdinand, beloved by a nation still celebrating its unification. The citizens of Brașov have offered her this decaying medieval fortress as a gift, a gesture of gratitude for her work bringing Transylvania into Greater Romania. She walks through the empty rooms, climbs the narrow staircases, stands on the terraces overlooking forested valleys. She sees what others cannot. Not a ruin, a refuge, not a forgotten customs post, a home. This is not the story tourists hear. The tourists speak of Dracula, of Vlad the Impaler, of vampires and Gothic horror. The marketing works. Millions come each year seeking the lair of Count Dracula, a fictional character who never existed, searching for connections to Vlad Peleș, a historical figure who likely never set foot here. The myth has eclipsed the truth, and the truth is darker, stranger, more human than any vampire tale. This is a story about a fortress built for war that became a sanctuary for peace, about a queen who transformed stone and mortar into art and memory, about a daughter who turned her inheritance into a hospital, about a regime that seized it all, about what remains when history strips away the legends and leaves only the facts. If you enjoy deep investigations into historical castles and the families who inhabited them, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which fortress to explore next. Your support makes these detailed stories possible. Thank you for being here. The story begins not with queens or vampires, but with merchants. Saxon traders who needed protection, Hungarian kings who needed a border secured, and a mountain pass that connected 2 worlds while keeping them dangerously separate. The Saxons built Bran Castle between 1377 and 1388. They were German colonists who had settled in Transylvania centuries earlier, brought by Hungarian kings to defend and develop the region. These were practical people. Merchants, craftsmen, builders. They understood that trade required security, and security required stone. The site was already military ground. In 1211, the Teutonic Knights had erected a wooden fortress near this pass, part of their brief and contentious tenure in the region. King Andrew II of Hungary had invited them to defend his southeastern border against Cuman and Pecheneg raids. The Knights built their fortification, called it Dietrichstein, and used it to guard the trade route through the Carpathian Mountains. But the Knights overstepped. They sought independence, petitioned the Pope for autonomous territory. Andrew expelled them in 1226. The wooden fort was destroyed, likely by Mongol invaders in 1242, during their devastating sweep through Hungary and Transylvania. For more than a century, the pass remained undefended. By the 1370s, the strategic calculus had changed. The Ottoman Empire was expanding northward, threatening Wallachia and the southern approaches to Transylvania. Trade was increasing through the mountain passes, which meant customs revenue was increasing, which meant someone needed to collect it, and someone needed to stop raids and ensure merchants could move safely between the 2 regions. On November 19, 1377, King Louis I of Hungary issued a document.
He granted the Saxons of Brașov the privilege to build a stone castle at Bran, at their own expense, using their own labor force. This was not royal charity. The Saxons would pay for construction, but they would also control the customs post and keep the revenue it generated. And they would defend the pass, which served everyone's interests. The king got security without cost. The Saxons got profit and protection. The document made it official. The work began immediately. The construction took 11 years. The location was chosen for military advantage, not comfort. The castle rises from a steep cliff between Magura Mountain and Dealu Cetati, a natural choke point where attackers would have to climb exposed rock faces under fire from above. From the towers, defenders could see for miles down the valley. Approaching armies had no cover. Traders could be stopped, inspected, taxed before they passed through. Geography became architecture.
The design was fortress first. 4 towers anchored the corners, thick walls connecting them. The central courtyard housed the well, dug nearly 200 feet through bedrock to reach water, critical for withstanding siege. Narrow staircases spiraled through the towers. Arrow slits commanded approaches. The entrance was small, easily defended, accessed only by a drawbridge that could be raised. This was not a palace, it was a machine for war. The workforce was local and professional. Saxon masons who understood stone, carpenters who knew how to frame towers, laborers who hauled materials up the cliff. The stone came from local quarries, the timber came from surrounding forests. Everything was carried by hand or pulled by animals up the steep approach. The logistics were brutal. But the Saxons were motivated. This fortress protected their trade, their wealth, their lives. By 1388, the castle was complete, solid, functional, imposing. The Hungarian king appointed a castle lord, always chosen from among the Transylvanian Saxons, who commanded the garrison and managed the customs operations. Professional soldiers staffed the walls. Mercenaries filled out the ranks when needed. In his writings, the 15th-century chronicler Ioan de Tarnava mentioned English brigands and ballista soldiers serving at Bran, evidence that the garrison drew fighters from across Europe. The castle worked exactly as intended. It defended, it collected, it endured. For the next several centuries, Bran Castle played its role as border fortress and customs checkpoint, changing hands between Hungarian kings, Transylvanian princes, and the city of Brașov, depending on who held power and who owed whom money or favors. The Ottoman Empire besieged it in 1442 and failed to take it. The walls held. This was not romantic. It was economics defended by violence. The castle existed to extract revenue and prevent invasion. The Saxons built it because trade made them rich, and they needed to protect that wealth. The system was clear. Those with capital built fortresses. Those with muscle defended them. Those without either paid customs or died trying to avoid it. And everyone understood that beauty was not the point. Function was the point. Survival was the point. Profit was the point. For more than 4 centuries, Bran Castle served its original purpose. Soldiers garrisoned the towers, customs officers inspected merchants. The fortress changed rulers, but not function. It was Hungarian property, then Transylvanian, then Hungarian again, then held by the city of Brașov after King Vladislaus II failed to repay loans in 1533. The debts were settled with real estate. The castle became municipal property, a practical transfer that reflected how power actually worked. In the early 15th century, King Sigismund of Hungary briefly granted the castle to Prince Mircea the Elder of Wallachia as a refuge and strategic base. Mircea established the customs post that would define Bran's economic role for centuries. Traders passing between Wallachia and Transylvania stopped here, declared their goods, paid their fees.
The revenue flowed to whoever controlled the castle. When Mircea died in 1419, the castle reverted to Hungarian and later Transylvanian control. The customs operations continued without interruption. Politics shifted. The money kept moving. The castle suffered damage repeatedly. In the late 16th and early 17th centuries, explosions, storms, and fires scarred the structure. Repairs followed each disaster. In 1622, Prince Gabriel Bethlen led significant restoration efforts, adding the southern entrance tower. In 1723, improvements were made to the northern donjon, firing slits for defense, an attic decorated with blind arcades and pilasters, a double-layered roof to reduce fire risk. A wooden pavilion topped the tower, allowing sentries to watch the valley below. The fortress adapted, strengthened, endured. Then the function dissolved. In 1836, the border between Transylvania and Wallachia was redrawn, moving the customs point to Pajura. Bran lost its commercial purpose overnight. The revenue stopped. The strategic importance faded. The castle remained an administrative seat for Brașov, but without customs duties or military urgency, there was no money to maintain it properly. Neglect followed predictably. Damage accumulated through the mid-19th century. The 1848 revolution brought violence that scarred the castle. The Russo-Turkish War of 1877 added more destruction. Brașov's inhabitants insisted the authorities repair the damage. Extensive restoration work was carried out between 1883 and 1886, stabilizing the structure, but not reimagining it. In 1888, Brașov's administration transferred the castle to the forestry department. The fortress became housing for foresters, forest inspectors, and woodsmen. 30 years of decay followed. The military machine sat empty, inhabited by men who tended trees instead of borders.
By 1920, Bran Castle was functional but forgotten. The stone walls stood strong because Saxon builders had done their work well centuries earlier. The tower still rose above the gorge. The wells still held water. But the castle had no purpose, no prestige, no future. Brașov didn't need it. The forestry department barely used it. It was medieval infrastructure in a modern world, obsolete and expensive to maintain. Then Transylvania became Romanian. The Treaty of Trianon, signed June 4, 1920, redrew Europe's borders after World War I. Hungary lost Transylvania. Romania gained it. The map changed, the loyalties changed, and suddenly Brașov's citizens found themselves part of Greater Romania, a newly unified kingdom under King Ferdinand and Queen Marie. The Queen had earned profound respect during the war. She had served as a nurse, working alongside her daughter, Princess Ileana, in military hospitals, caring for wounded Romanian soldiers. She had traveled the country, visiting troops, boosting morale, embodying resilience while her nation fought and bled. When Transylvania was incorporated into Romania, she was instrumental in the diplomatic and symbolic work of unification. The people of Brașov wanted to thank her. They had little to offer except history. They offered her the castle. On December 1, 1920, the Brașov City Council voted unanimously to deed Bran Castle to Queen Marie of Romania. The official document described her as the great queen who spreads her blessing everywhere she walks, thus winning with an irresistible momentum the hearts of the entire country's population. This was not exaggeration. Marie was genuinely beloved, a rare condition for royalty. She had earned it through service, through presence, through caring about people who were not obligated to care about her. She accepted the gift, and then she did something unexpected. She fell in love with it. Marie was not looking for another palace. She already had several royal residences, including the grand Peleș castle in Sinaia. But Bran was different. It sat in the mountains, surrounded by forests and valleys, far from Bucharest's formalities and political pressures. The castle felt like a retreat, a place where she could breathe.
She walked through the empty rooms, imagined what they could become, saw past the decay to something beautiful. She decided to transform it, not into a fortress, into a home.
Queen Marie hired Czech architect Karel Zdeněk Lehmann to oversee the renovation. Lehmann had already worked on Peleș and Peleș castles, so he understood how to blend historical architecture with modern comfort. He understood Marie's aesthetic sensibilities, which leaned toward romanticism, color, personal expression. She wanted Bran to feel lived in, warm, distinctly hers, not a museum, not a showpiece, a place where she could exist without performance. The work began immediately and continued through the 1920s and early 1930s. The castle had 57 rooms spread across 4 floors, a maze of chambers connected by narrow staircases and secret passages. Lehmann maintained the medieval bones, the stone walls, the tower structure, the central courtyard, but he transformed the interior spaces into something far more comfortable than any 14th-century fortress was designed to be. He added timber framing to soften the stone. Attic floors expanded usable space. Loggias opened the ground level to light and air. Terraces were built on upper floors, creating outdoor sitting areas with views of the valleys below. 2 round towers were added, one above the courtyard well, another near the southern tower. Defensive arrow slits were converted into windows. Saxon-styled tiled stoves from the 19th century were installed to provide heat without relying entirely on fireplaces. The goal was comfort without erasing history. Modern amenities within medieval walls. Marie personally oversaw the interior design. She brought in furniture collected from across Europe, mixing styles and periods with an artist's eye for color and texture. Romanian folk art appeared alongside French antiques. Hand-painted tiles decorated bathrooms. Silk wall coverings adorned bedrooms. She created a golden white ballroom, a music room, a chapel honoring Prince Mircea. Each space reflected her taste, which was eclectic, vibrant, unafraid of boldness. This was not stiff royal formality. This was personal. The chapel deserves specific attention. Marie dedicated it to Prince Mircea, not Mircea the Elder, who had briefly held the castle in the 15th century, but her own son, Prince Mircea, who had died of typhoid fever in 1916 at age 3. She called him the great love of my heart. The chapel became a place of memory and grief, a private space where she could sit with loss. The castle, for all its grandeur, was also a repository for sorrow. Beauty and pain coexisted in the same rooms. The practical challenges were significant. The castle's 188-foot-deep well provided water, but not nearly enough for a full royal household. Lehmann installed a water pipe to bring running water from nearby natural springs across the valley. In 1932, a small hydroelectric power plant was built on the Turku stream, providing electricity not just to the castle, but to the surrounding villages of Bran, Simon, and Moieciu. Modern infrastructure arrived slowly, expensively, but it arrived. Marie also commissioned work on the grounds. An English-style park was designed around the castle, featuring 2 ponds, walking paths, carefully planned gardens. A tea house was built on the grounds, later converted into a restaurant. She wanted the landscape to feel intentional, cared for, an extension of the castle's transformation. And then there was the elevator. Marie suffered from arthritis, and climbing the castle's steep staircases became increasingly painful. Lehmann designed an elevator shaft built directly into the well, descending 31.5 meters from the castle down to the garden at the base of the cliff. The queen could move between the castle and the park without navigating countless stairs. The elevator was functional, but also symbolic. Modernity literally carved through medieval rock,
connecting old and new. During the renovation, workers discovered something unexpected. While moving an old fireplace on the first floor, they uncovered a hidden staircase, a secret passage connecting the first floor to the third. It had been forgotten, its entrance concealed behind the fireplace for decades, possibly centuries. The passage had likely served as an emergency escape route, a way to flee if the castle was breached. The discovery delighted Marie. She kept the passage accessible, another layer of history preserved within her home. The total cost of the renovation is not precisely recorded, but it was substantial. Marie poured resources into Bran, far more than the forestry department or the city of Brașov could have afforded. The work was funded by royal wealth, a privilege that allowed transformation impossible for municipal budgets. The castle that had been decaying under public ownership thrived under private investment. This was not unusual. Wealth rescues what poverty abandons. The pattern repeats across centuries. By the early 1930s, the transformation was complete. Bran Castle had become Queen Marie's favorite residence. She spent summers there, often alone or with close family, away from court obligations and public scrutiny. She painted, wrote, walked the grounds, hosted intimate gatherings rather than state functions. The castle became her sanctuary. And it was beautiful. Visitors who saw it during this period described it as enchanting, a perfect blend of medieval atmosphere and royal comfort. The red tile roofs and white walls glowed in mountain sunlight. The interior spaces felt warm, personal, alive. The castle worked exactly as Marie intended. It was hers. Bran Castle in the 1920s and 1930s was not a grand estate in the style of Versailles or Peleș. It was smaller, more intimate, a private retreat rather than a center of state power. But it still required staff. The castle's 57 rooms needed cleaning, the grounds needed tending, meals needed cooking, guests needed serving. The beautiful transformation Queen Marie had created demanded constant labor to maintain. The household staff at Bran was smaller than at major royal palaces, but the structure was the same. A housekeeper managed the interior operations, a butler coordinated service, housemaids cleaned rooms and maintained linens, kitchen staff prepared meals, groundskeepers tended the gardens and the English park. Stable hands cared for horses. The invisible workforce that made royal life possible operated here just as it did everywhere wealth concentrated. Specific numbers are harder to confirm for Bran than for larger estates. The castle's records from this period are incomplete, and much documentation was lost or dispersed when the communist regime seized the property in 1948. But based on the size of the household and comparison with similar royal properties, a reasonable estimate suggests 20 to 40 staff members worked at Bran during Marie's residency, with numbers increasing when guests arrived or during summer months when the Queen was in residence. The work began early. Housemaids woke before dawn to light fires in the tiled stoves, ensuring rooms were warm before the family rose. Kitchen staff began preparing breakfast. The grounds had to be tended, paths swept, gardens weeded. The castle needed to appear effortlessly maintained, which meant staff worked constantly to erase visible signs of labor. The goal was seamless operation, no dirt, no disorder, no evidence of the machinery that made comfort possible. The physical spaces of labor were separate from the spaces of leisure. Service staircases allowed staff to move through the castle without being seen by family or guests. These staircases were narrow, undecorated, purely functional. The contrast with the main rooms was stark. Where Marie's spaces featured silk wallpaper and painted tiles, the service areas were plain stone and whitewash. The architecture enforced separation. Two worlds occupied the same building, but were designed never to intersect visibly. Wages at Bran Castle were likely competitive for the period and region. Queen Marie had a reputation for treating staff well by the standards of her time and class. She was not known as a harsh employer, but context matters. Being a relatively kind employer within a system of profound inequality does not erase the inequality. Staff worked long hours for modest pay, dependent on royal favor for their livelihoods. Dismissal meant loss of income, housing, and reference. The power imbalance was absolute, even when exercised gently. What the staff actually thought about working at Bran Castle is only partially visible through surviving records. A few letters, occasional mentions in household accounts, anecdotes preserved in family stories. The picture that emerges is complicated. Many staff appear to have been proud to work for Queen Marie, who was genuinely beloved in Romania. Her kindness was not performative. Accounts suggest she genuinely cared about people who served her. But gratitude and affection do not eliminate structural dependence. A gentle master is still a master. Kindness from a position of total control is still a form of control. Some staff stayed at Bran for years, which suggests they found the conditions acceptable, perhaps preferable to alternatives. Others left, though the reasons are rarely recorded. The historical record preserves the perspective of the powerful far more thoroughly than the perspectives of those who served them. We know what Marie thought about Bran because she wrote extensively. We know far less about what the housemaids, the stable hands, the kitchen workers thought, because their voices were not considered worth preserving. The castle's beauty was real. The labor that maintained it was real. Both facts exist simultaneously. Marie created something genuinely beautiful at Bran, a place that brought her peace and joy. And that beauty required constant, largely invisible work by people whose names are mostly forgotten. The contradiction is not unusual. It is the pattern. Wealth creates beauty through labor it does not acknowledge. During these years, the castle hummed with quiet activity. Marie painted in her studio. Princess Ileana visited with her children, enjoying the mountain air and the relative freedom of a private residence away from Bucharest's formalities. The grounds bloomed with carefully tended flowers. The rooms glowed with light from the new electrical system. Everything functioned smoothly, the result of planning, investment, and the daily labor of people whose names do not appear in the tourist materials. The castle felt timeless. It felt permanent, and for a brief moment it was exactly what Marie wanted it to be: a refuge, a home, a place where she could exist on her own terms. But permanence is always temporary, and refuge is always contingent.
Queen Marie died on July 18, 1938, at Peleș Castle in Sinaia. She was 62 years old. Her death shook Romania. Hundreds of thousands lined the streets during her funeral procession. She had been more than a queen. She had been a symbol of resilience, a figure who had embodied national unity during and after the war. Her loss was personal for many Romanians who had never met her but felt they knew her through her wartime service and public presence. Her will specified an unusual request. She wanted her heart to be buried separately from her body. Her body would lie with other Romanian monarchs at Curtea de Argeș Cathedral, but her heart was to be placed in a silver casket and buried at the chapel of her palace in Balcic on the Black Sea coast, a property she had developed and loved. The request was honored. Her heart was removed, placed in the silver casket, and interred at Balcic. But geopolitics does not respect sentiment. In 1940, under pressure from the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, Romania was forced to cede southern Dobruja, including Balcic, to Bulgaria. Hours before Bulgarian forces took possession of the territory, General Zvidnek, Marie's faithful adjutant, retrieved the casket containing her heart and brought it to Bran Castle. Princess Ileana, Marie's youngest daughter, placed the casket in a carved niche inside the small wooden chapel near the hospital she had built.
The heart remained there, separated from the body, exile imposed even in death. Princess Ileana inherited Bran Castle. Born in 1909, she was Marie's youngest child, the one who had shared her mother's love for this particular place. Ileana had grown up visiting Bran, spending summers in the mountains, riding horses through the forests, developing a deep attachment to the castle and the surrounding region. When it became hers in 1938, she was 29 years old, married to Archduke Anton of Austria, and already navigating the treacherous politics of a Europe sliding toward war. Ileana's early life had been marked by displacement. Her brother, King Carol II, had forced her and her husband into exile shortly after their marriage in 1931, claiming the Romanian people would never tolerate a Habsburg living on Romanian soil. The excuse was thin. Carol was jealous of Ileana's popularity and wanted her removed from the country. She and Anton settled at Schloss Sonneberg in Austria, where they raised their growing family, 6 children in total. Ileana felt the exile keenly. Romania was her home. Bran Castle was her mother's gift, and she was forbidden from living there. Carol's abdication in 1940 changed everything. The political pressures that had kept Ileana in exile dissolved. She returned to Romania and claimed Bran Castle as its rightful heir. But the timing could not have been worse. Romania was now allied with Nazi Germany. World War II was escalating. The Soviet Union was already maneuvering for post-war control of Eastern Europe. Ileana returned to a country on the edge of catastrophe.
She made a decision that defined the next phase of Bran's history. She would turn the castle into a hospital. In 1943, Ileana moved her family back to Bran. She had already established a hospital at Schloss Sonneberg earlier in the war to treat wounded Romanian soldiers, serving as both administrator and nurse. Now she founded the Hospital of the Queen's Heart at Bran, named in honor of her mother. The hospital was built near the castle, at the foot of the cliff, with funding from one of Romania's wealthiest industrialists. It was designed to treat wounded aviators and soldiers, as well as civilians from the surrounding villages. Ileana worked as a nurse. This was not symbolic. She trained with the Romanian Red Cross, learned medical procedures, spent long hours tending to patients. Her hands-on involvement was genuine, driven by the same sense of duty that had motivated her mother during World War I. By 1944, the hospital was treating over 1,000 patients. The conditions were difficult, supplies were limited, the war was not going well for Romania. But the hospital functioned, and Ileana was there, doing the work. Her husband Anton joined her at Bran, but was soon placed under house arrest by the Soviet Red Army, which occupied Romania in August 1944, after the country switched sides and joined the Allies. The shift in allegiance did not save Romania from Soviet control. The Red Army stayed, and with it came the certainty that everything was about to change. Ileana continued running the hospital, even as Soviet forces moved through the region. She advocated for wounded soldiers and political prisoners, pressing officials to respect their rights. This was dangerous. The Soviet-backed regime that was consolidating power saw her as a threat. She was a member of the old royal family, beloved by the population, connected to the Habsburgs, and visibly compassionate toward people the new regime considered enemies. She became a target. In 1945, Ileana met Emil Bodnaraș, an influential member of the Romanian Communist Party. She presented her plan to expand the hospital, and her sincerity impressed him. He promised to help when his party came to power. He kept the promise, at least initially. When the chief surgeon at the Brașov hospital was arrested, Ileana wrote to Bodnaraș, and he intervened to secure the surgeon's release. Later, as war crimes trials began, Ileana met with Bodnaraș in secret, pleading with him not to begin the new regime with mass executions. Some of her appeals succeeded,
Others did not. The regime was consolidating power, and mercy was not its defining characteristic. The castle during these years was simultaneously a royal residence, a working hospital, and a symbol of a world ending. Ileana lived in rooms her mother had decorated, surrounded by art and memory, while wounded soldiers were treated in buildings at the castle's base. The beauty remained, the function had transformed again, and the forces closing in were far larger than one woman's determination to preserve her mother's legacy.
December 30th, 1947. King Michael I of Romania abdicated under duress. Soviet-backed forces surrounded the royal palace in Bucharest, threatening civil war if he refused. The monarchy was abolished. The People's Republic of Romania was proclaimed. The communist regime, led by Gheorghe Gheorghiu Dej and influenced by figures like Anna Pauker, consolidated power rapidly and ruthlessly. The old order was dismantled systematically. Wealth was seized. Property was nationalized. Anyone connected to the former regime became an enemy of the state. Princess Ileana was a problem for the new government. She was a member of the royal family. She was beloved by the local population, which made her dangerous. She had connections to the Habsburgs, which made her suspect. And she was running a hospital, providing care and showing compassion, which made her visible. The regime wanted her gone. In 1948, the government moved. Bran Castle and the hospital were confiscated. Ileana was branded an enemy of the people. She was followed, monitored, threatened. The message was clear: leave or face arrest. She had no legal recourse. The courts served the regime. The police served the regime. The only choice was exile or imprisonment. Ileana chose exile. The decision broke her. When the time came to leave, crowds gathered to see her off. She handed out fir branches, symbols of eternal love, life, and faith in Romanian tradition. As the carriage carrying her got stuck in snow, villagers rushed to help push it free. When Ileana offered them money, one villager refused. "No, princess, we cannot take your money today. Did you not answer our calls day or night? No one ever came to your door without being received. We only did you a small kindness. Though it is so sad, even the earth does not want to let you go. But we have one request. Will you kneel with us to pray for the king, for our country, and for your safe return?" She knelt with them in the snow. They prayed together. Then she left Romania for the last time. Ileana and her family fled first to Switzerland, then to Argentina, where she established a home for Romanian refugees. In 1950, she moved to the United States, settling in Boston. Over the next decade, she traveled extensively, meeting members of the Romanian diaspora, advocating for refugees, trying to build a new life in a country she had never intended to call home. Her marriage to Anton ended in divorce in 1954. She remarried briefly to Dr. Stefan Isarescu, but that marriage also failed. By 1961, she had made another life-changing decision. She took religious vows, entering an Orthodox monastery in France and taking the name Mother Alexandra. She had lost her country, her castle, her family's position. Faith became what remained. In 1967, she returned to the United States and founded the Orthodox Monastery of the Transfiguration in Elwood City, Pennsylvania. She served as abbess until 1981. She lived quietly, far from the world she had been born into, devoted to a spiritual practice that offered meaning after so much loss. She died on January 21, 1991, at age 82, after suffering a fall and 2 heart attacks. She was buried at the monastery she had founded. She never saw Bran Castle returned to her family. The communist regime held it until 1989. Back in Romania, Bran Castle became a state museum in 1956. The communist authorities stripped much of the original furniture and decoration. Some pieces were exhibited in other museums, others were taken by officials or simply disappeared.
The castle opened to the public, but the story told to visitors was sanitized, edited, safe. The tours focused on medieval history, on the fortress's role guarding the pass, on the vague and false connection to Dracula. Queen Marie was mentioned briefly, if at all. Princess Ileana was not mentioned. The hospital was forgotten. The communist regime wanted no reminders of the royal family's popularity or service. In the 1970s and 1980s, American and Western European tourists began arriving in larger numbers, drawn by the Dracula myth. Bram Stoker's novel, published in 1897, had never mentioned Bran Castle by name. Stoker likely never knew the castle existed. His description of Dracula's lair bore no resemblance to Bran's actual architecture, and Vlad the Impaler, the historical figure loosely connected to Stoker's fictional vampire, never owned Bran Castle and probably never stayed there for more than brief periods, if at all. Some historians once believed Vlad was imprisoned at Bran for 2 months in 1462, after being captured by the Hungarian king, but more recent scholarship suggests he was held in Budapest instead. None of this mattered to marketing. The Romanian government, desperate for hard currency from tourism, embraced the Dracula connection. Bran Castle became Dracula's castle in promotional materials. Souvenirs flooded the market: vampire teeth, plastic capes, keychains with fangs. The myth sold. The truth was buried. Tourists came seeking Gothic horror and found a medieval fortress with a tragic recent history they were never told. The communist regime carried out restoration work in the late 1980s, repairing structural damage and updating the museum exhibits. The castle reopened in 1993, 4 years after the regime fell. Romania was now a post-communist state, navigating the chaotic transition to a market economy and democracy. The question of ownership became complicated. The property had been seized illegally under communist law, but restitution was politically sensitive. Wealthy former aristocrats reclaiming castles, while ordinary Romanians struggled economically, was not a popular narrative. In the 1990s and in the early 2000s, the Romanian government carried out further restoration, repairing exhibit spaces and upgrading safety and security systems. The Romanian government also established a committee to manage the castle and develop its tourism potential. The committee focused on balancing the historical significance of Bran Castle with the Dracula myth, a fine line that continues to be challenging. In 2005, the Romanian government passed a law allowing restitution claims on properties illegally expropriated during the communist era. In 2006, Bran Castle was legally returned to Princess Ileana's surviving children, Archduke Dominic of Habsburg, Archduchess Maria Magdalena, and Archduchess Elizabeth. The decision sparked controversy. The Romanian parliament tried to block it, claiming the restitution violated property and succession laws. The Constitutional Court rejected the parliament's petition in October 2007. An investigation commission reaffirmed the legality of the restitution in December 2007. The process was contentious, but the law upheld the family's claim. On May 18, 2009, administration of Bran Castle was transferred from the Romanian government to the Habsburg heirs. On June 1, 2009, they opened the refurbished castle to the public as the first private museum in Romania. The family leased the castle back to the Romanian state for museum operations while retaining ownership. The arrangement was pragmatic. The family gained property rights, the state maintained access for tourism, which generated significant revenue for the region. The castle today draws hundreds of thousands of visitors annually. Most come for Dracula. The tours have improved in recent years, incorporating more historical information about Queen Marie and Princess Ileana. But the Dracula myth still dominates. The gift shops still sell vampire merchandise. The marketing still leans heavily on Gothic horror. The truth competes with fiction, and fiction is easier to sell.
Stand at Bran Castle today. Look up at the red tile roofs, the white stone walls, the towers rising above the gorge. The structure is solid.
The restoration work has been careful and professional. The castle looks much as it did when Queen Marie walked through its rooms in the 1920s. The surfaces are maintained, the gardens are tended, the museum functions efficiently. Hundreds of thousands pass through every year. But something is missing. Walk through the rooms, look at the exhibits. The furniture is largely modern, placed to suggest what might have been there. Marie's original pieces, the eclectic mix of Romanian folk art and European antiques she personally selected, are mostly gone. Some pieces were returned after restitution, many were not. The communist regime dispersed the contents. Some items appeared in state museums, others vanished into private collections. The building remains, the soul was scattered. The Dracula mythology eclipses the history. A fictional vampire who never existed dominates the narrative of the castle, where a real queen created refuge and a real princess ran a hospital. The marketing makes business sense. More people know Bram Stoker's Count Dracula than Queen Marie of Romania. The vampire brand generates tourism. Tourism generates revenue. Revenue funds preservation. The economic logic is clear, and yet something feels wrong about it. The castle was built by Saxons as a customs fortress in 1377. It was transformed by a queen into a sanctuary in the 1920s. It became a hospital during World War II. It was seized by communists in 1948. It was stripped, repurposed, marketed as something it never was. It was restored to its legal owners in 2009. And now it operates as a museum that tells multiple stories, some true, some false, all competing for attention. What Bran Castle reveals is the instability of purpose. Buildings outlast the reasons they were built. A fortress becomes a palace, becomes a hospital, becomes a museum. The stone endures, the meaning shifts. Each generation imposes new narratives, erases old ones, claims the structure for its own purposes. The castle cannot speak. It can only hold whatever story humans decide to tell about it.
The Saxon merchants who built Bran in the 1370s wanted security for their trade. They got it. For centuries, the castle worked exactly as intended. Then the border moved, and the purpose vanished. The building remained, functionally obsolete, until Queen Marie saw a possibility where others saw decay. She wanted refuge. She created it. She poured wealth and attention into transforming military architecture into personal sanctuary. And it worked, for a time, until she died and geopolitics erased her daughter's inheritance. Princess Ileana wanted to serve. She turned her mother's refuge into a hospital, treating wounded soldiers and civilians in a war that would ultimately destroy everything she had. The service was real. The compassion was real. The hospital treated over 1,000 patients, and then the regime seized it all, labeled her an enemy, forced her into exile. The building remained. The purpose was erased. The story was rewritten. The communist government wanted tourism revenue and ideological control. They marketed Dracula, stripped away royal history, and turned the castle into a state museum that served political and economic purposes. The fiction sold better than the truth. The strategy worked. Visitors came, money flowed, and the castle became famous for something it never was. The current owners want to preserve and profit, a reasonable goal. They've restored what they could, opened a private museum, maintained the structure. They tell a better story now than the communist regime did, acknowledging Marie and Ileana alongside the medieval history. But they still market Dracula heavily because that's what brings people through the gates. Economics shapes truth. Each phase of Bran's history involved labor that has been largely forgotten.
Saxon workers hauled stone up the cliff in the 1370s. Their names are not recorded. Renovation workers in the 1920s installed electricity, plumbing, and that remarkable elevator carved through the well. We know the architect's name. We don't know the workers. Nurses and staff at the hospital during World War II saved lives. Some of their names survive. Most do not. Museum staff today maintain the property, guide tours, preserve the structure. Their work is visible if you look. Most visitors do not look.
The pattern repeats. Buildings are created through labor. Labor is rendered invisible. Credit goes to the person who commissioned the work, the person whose name appears in documents, the person whose story is worth preserving. Everyone else fades. This is not unique to Bran. It is the structure. It is how power works. Queen Marie genuinely loved Bran Castle. Her letters and writings make that clear. It brought her peace, joy, freedom from the performative demands of court life. Her transformation of the castle was an act of creation, an artistic project she pursued with vision and care. The beauty she created was real, the refuge she built was real, and the labor that made it possible was real. Both facts exist. The castle was Marie's sanctuary and the product of work by people whose names we do not know. Acknowledging one truth does not erase the other. Princess Ileana genuinely served. Her work at the hospital was not symbolic or performative. She trained as a nurse. She treated patients. She advocated for the wounded and the imprisoned. She risked her safety and ultimately lost her home because she refused to abandon people who needed care. The service was real, the sacrifice was real, and the forces that destroyed her inheritance were far larger than individual virtue or vice. The regime that seized Bran was not motivated by personal cruelty toward Ileana. It was motivated by ideology and power consolidation. She was collateral damage in a political transformation that swallowed millions. History is not a story of heroes and villains. It is a story of people making choices within systems they did not create, constrained by forces they cannot control. Queen Marie was a compassionate, creative woman born into extraordinary privilege. She used that privilege to create something beautiful. She also lived within a monarchy that concentrated wealth and power in ways that exploited and excluded vast numbers of people. Both facts are true. Holding them in tension is uncomfortable and necessary. Princess Ileana was a devoted nurse, a loving mother, a woman of genuine faith who served others at great personal cost. She was also a Habsburg, a member of a family whose dynastic history included centuries of imperial domination across Europe. Both facts are true. Her personal virtue does not erase her family's history. Her family's history does not erase her personal service. Complexity is the only honest framework. The communist regime that seized Bran was motivated by ideology that claimed to serve workers and challenge inequality. It also created a repressive state that imprisoned, murdered, and impoverished millions. It seized property illegally. It destroyed families. It rewrote history to serve political purposes. It marketed fiction because fiction sold better than truth. Both the ideology's stated goals and its actual methods must be examined. Claiming to serve justice while committing injustice is its own form of exploitation. Bran Castle today stands as evidence of all of this. The Saxon foundations, the medieval trade economy, the royal transformation, the wartime service, the communist seizure, the post-communist restitution, the Dracula marketing. Every layer of history is visible if you know where to look. Most visitors do not know where to look. The tours are improving, but they still prioritize fiction over complexity. And perhaps that is inevitable,
Complexity does not fit on a souvenir. Who actually paid for Bran Castle across its long history? The answer shifts with each era, revealing patterns about how power, wealth, and labor interact. The Saxons paid first. They built the original fortress between 1377 and 1388 using their own funds and labor. King Louis I granted them the privilege to build, but he did not fund it. The Saxons invested because they needed security for trade and control of the customs revenue. The workers who hauled stone up the cliff, who mixed mortar, who framed the towers, were paid from Saxon resources. The investment served Saxon interests. The labor was local, the materials local, the purpose local. The fortress worked as intended for more than 4 centuries. The original investors got exactly what they paid for. Then Queen Marie paid. Between 1920 and her death in 1938, she funded the complete transformation of a decaying customs fortress into a royal residence. The costs were covered by royal wealth, money accumulated through inherited privilege and state resources. Architect Karel Zdeněk-Lehmann was paid, construction workers were paid, furniture was purchased, the hydroelectric plant was built, the English gardens were designed, the chapel was dedicated. Marie invested personal and dynastic wealth into creating a private sanctuary. She got what she wanted, a refuge, a home, a place that brought her joy. But where did Marie's wealth come from? She was born Princess Marie Alexandra Victoria of Edinburgh, granddaughter of Queen Victoria and Tsar Alexander II of Russia. Her wealth was inherited, accumulated through generations of European royal intermarriage, colonial exploitation, and state extraction. She personally did not create that wealth. She inherited a system that produced it. She used it to create beauty. The connection between the wealth's origins and its eventual use is direct. The castle's transformation was funded by centuries of accumulated power. Princess Ileana paid differently. She funded the Hospital of the Queen's Heart during World War II, using a combination of personal resources and donations, including significant funding from one of Romania's wealthiest industrialists. The hospital treated over 1,000 patients. The costs were real: medical supplies, staff salaries, facility maintenance. Ileana also paid with her time and labor, working as a trained nurse. She got a hospital, a functioning institution that served genuine need. And then she lost everything when the communist regime seized the castle and forced her into exile. She paid with her inheritance, her home, her country. The communist regime seized the castle in 1948 without compensation. They claimed the property in the name of the people, nationalizing it as part of a systematic dismantling of the old order. They paid nothing. They took by force, backed by the Soviet army and the threat of imprisonment or execution. The seizure was ideologically justified as redistribution of wealth from aristocracy to the working class. In practice, the castle became a state museum that generated tourism revenue for the government. The people did not control it. The state controlled it, and the state was not the people.
Maintaining the castle under communist rule required labor and resources. Museum staff, maintenance workers, restoration specialists were paid from state budgets, which were funded by taxation and state-controlled industries. The labor was real. The costs were real. The castle was preserved, structurally at least, even as its contents were stripped. Who paid? Ultimately, Romanian citizens through their labor in a state-controlled economy. The state claimed to act in their interest. The state also denied them political freedom, economic opportunity, and access to truth about their own history. After restitution in 2006, the Habsburg heirs regained legal ownership. The exact financial arrangements for the museum's operation are complex, involving leases and agreements with the Romanian state. The current system splits costs and revenue between private owners and public institutions.
Preservation work is expensive. Tourism infrastructure requires constant investment. The castle generates significant revenue, which funds ongoing operations and restoration. Who benefits now? The Habsburg heirs benefit from property value and tourism revenue. The Romanian state benefits from tourism income and regional economic activity. The local communities benefit from employment and associated business. Tourists benefit from access to a historically significant site. The distribution of benefit is more diffuse than in previous eras, but it is not equal. Wealth still concentrates. Power still determines access. Across all these phases, the workers remain largely invisible. The Saxon laborers who built the fortress in the 14th century, the renovation workers in the 1920s who installed modern systems and transformed the interior, the hospital staff during World War II who treated the wounded, the museum workers under communism who guided tours and maintained the structure, the current staff who preserve and operate the museum. Their names are mostly forgotten. Their labor made everything possible. They were paid, yes, but payment is not the same as acknowledgement. Wages are not the same as credit. The castle stands because workers built it, maintained it, preserved it across 7 centuries. The beauty exists because workers implemented the designs, hauled the materials, installed the systems. The museum functions because workers guide tours, clean rooms, repair damage. Without their labor, Bran Castle would be ruins. And yet the story told to tourists centers on Saxons, queens, communists, owners, those who commanded and claimed, not those who built and maintained. This is not unique to Bran, it is the pattern of history. Those with power and wealth commission projects. Those without power and wealth make the projects real. Credit flows to the commissioners, labor flows from the workers. The system rewards capital and erases labor. And the castle, beautiful and enduring, stands as evidence of both the achievement and the extraction. Was it worth it? The question has no single answer. The Saxons got security and profit for centuries. Queen Marie got a refuge that brought her genuine joy. Princess Ileana got a hospital that saved lives. The communist regime got tourism revenue. The current owners got property and income. The tourists get access to history and architecture. And the workers across all eras got wages, sometimes fair, sometimes not, and largely anonymous contribution to something that outlasted them. The castle is magnificent. The castle is also a machine that required constant feeding, resources, labor, money, from people and systems far removed from its walls. Both statements are true. The beauty does not erase the cost. The cost does not negate the beauty. To understand Bran Castle honestly requires holding both truths simultaneously and refusing to let comfort erase complexity.
The Dracula myth deserves examination because it is the story most people believe about Bran Castle, and it is almost entirely false. Understanding why the lie spread and who benefits from it reveals something important about how history is marketed and consumed. Bram Stoker published Dracula in 1897. The novel was a Gothic horror story about an immortal vampire living in a remote Transylvanian castle. Stoker's research included reading about Vlad III, Prince of Wallachia, known as Vlad the Impaler, who ruled in the mid-15th century and gained notoriety for his brutal methods of execution. Stoker borrowed the name Dracula, derived from Vlad's nickname Dracula, son of the dragon, but his fictional character bore little resemblance to the historical figure. Bram Stoker never visited Romania. He never saw Transylvania. His descriptions of the landscape and architecture were based on secondary sources, travel writing, and imagination.
His depiction of Dracula's castle, perched on a cliff above a rushing river, with crumbling towers and Gothic atmosphere, does not match Bran Castle's actual architecture. Bran is medieval and fortress-like, yes, but its structure is different from what Stoker described. The novel never mentions Bran by name. There is no textual evidence that Stoker knew Bran Castle existed. Vlad the Impaler's connection to Bran Castle is tenuous at best. Vlad ruled Wallachia, not Transylvania. Bran was controlled by the Kingdom of Hungary and later the city of Brașov. Vlad fought against Hungarian interests during his reign. He would have seen Bran as an enemy fortress, not a residence. Some older scholarship claimed Vlad was imprisoned at Bran for 2 months in 1462 after being captured by Matthias Corvinus of Hungary. More recent research suggests this imprisonment occurred in Budapest instead. There is no reliable evidence Vlad ever controlled or lived at Bran Castle. He may have passed through the area briefly during military campaigns. That is the extent of the connection. So how did Bran become Dracula's castle? Marketing. In the 1970s, as tourism to Romania increased and Nicolae Ceausescu's regime desperately needed hard currency, the government began promoting Bran as Dracula's home. The logic was purely commercial. Stoker's novel was famous internationally. Transylvania was mentioned in the novel. Bran looked Gothic and atmospheric. The connection was fabricated, but tourists did not care. They wanted to visit Dracula's castle. Bran was close enough.
The strategy worked spectacularly. Tourism increased, revenue flowed. The Dracula brand became Romania's most valuable cultural export. Hotels, restaurants, souvenir shops, tour companies, entire industries grew around the vampire myth. The economic benefits were real and substantial. Rural communities near Bran gained employment, infrastructure improved, investment followed tourism. But the cost was truth. The real history of Bran Castle, its construction by Saxons, its role guarding trade, its transformation by Queen Marie, its service as a hospital under Princess Ileana, its seizure by communists, was buried under vampire clichés. The tours during communist rule barely mentioned the royal family. Marie was inconvenient because she was beloved, a reminder that the monarchy had provided genuine service and leadership. Ileana was more inconvenient still because she had been driven into exile by the regime that now controlled the castle. The communist authorities preferred medieval history and fictional vampires to recent history that complicated their narrative. After restitution in 2006, the Habsburg heirs could have completely rejected the Dracula marketing. They could have insisted on historical accuracy, stripped away the vampire merchandise, and focused entirely on the Saxon, royal, and wartime history. They did not. The Dracula brand was too valuable. It drove tourism. Tourism funded preservation and generated profit. The family compromise was to add more historical content to the tours while maintaining the vampire marketing. The gift shops still sell plastic fangs and vampire capes. The promotional materials still reference Dracula, but you can also learn about Queen Marie if you pay attention during the tour or read the updated exhibit materials. This is pragmatic. It is also dishonest. The fiction crowds out the truth. Most tourists leave Bran believing they visited Dracula's castle. They may remember something vague about a queen, but the vampire story dominates their memory. The museum has improved, but marketing still prioritizes myth over history because myth sells better. Why does the myth sell better? Because it's simpler, because it requires no moral complexity, because vampires are entertaining and queens are complicated. A tourist can enjoy a vampire castle without confronting colonialism, wealth inequality, political persecution, or the mechanics of how beauty gets created and maintained. The Dracula story is escapism. The real history of Bran Castle is uncomfortable. The myth also sells better because most tourists have no prior connection to Romanian history. They know Bram Stoker's novel or the countless Dracula films. They do not know Queen Marie or Princess Ileana. The vampire is a cultural touchstone. The royal family is obscure. Marketing works by meeting audiences where they are, not where you wish they were. The economic logic is clear. And it is still a lie. Does the lie cause harm? Yes and no. On one hand, tourists who want to see Dracula's castle are not harmed by visiting Bran. They get a pleasant experience, see beautiful architecture, buy souvenirs, go home happy. The castle is preserved, the local economy benefits. No one is forced to believe the myth. On the other hand, truth has value. History has value. The people who actually built, inhabited, and fought for Bran Castle deserve to be remembered accurately. When fiction eclipses truth, we lose something important about who we are and how we understand power, wealth, and labor. The Dracula myth at Bran Castle is a case study in how history gets commodified. The castle itself is real, the architecture is real, but the story sold to tourists is mostly fantasy. The fantasy generates revenue, which funds preservation, which maintains the physical structure. The building survives partly because of the lie, and the lie prevents most people from understanding the truth. Both facts exist simultaneously. Complexity, again, refuses simple judgment. If you visit Bran Castle, you should know you are not visiting Dracula's lair. You are visiting a Saxon fortress that became a royal sanctuary, that became a hospital, that became a communist museum, that became a private museum that markets itself as Dracula's castle. Every layer of that history is more interesting than the vampire fiction. But you have to look past the merchandise to find it, and most tourists do not look past the merchandise. The architecture of Bran Castle tells its own story, separate from the people who owned or occupied it. Walk the structure carefully, and you can see the layers of purpose written in stone, timber, and design. The original Saxon fortress from the 1370s and 1380s still forms the core. 4 towers anchor the corners: the northern dungeon, the southern entrance tower, the watchtower, and the 4th tower. Thick stone walls connect them, creating a defensive perimeter designed to withstand siege. The towers are not decorative, they are functional military architecture. Each provided a firing position, each controlled an approach. Together, they made the castle nearly impossible to storm. The entrance was designed for defense, not welcome. A small gate, originally accessed by drawbridge, forced attackers to approach single file under fire from above. Once through the gate, anyone entering faced a narrow passage that could be blocked easily. The defenders had every advantage, the attackers had none. This was intentional. The castle was built to hold, not to invite. The central courtyard is small, surrounded by buildings on all sides. At its center sits the well, dropping 188 feet through solid rock to reach water. The well was essential. A castle under siege needs water more than anything else. The Saxons dug through stone by hand, an extraordinary engineering feat for the 14th century, because they understood that thirst defeats armies faster than weapons. The well still exists. The water still flows. The staircases are narrow, winding, steep. This was defensive design. Tight staircases limit how many attackers can advance at once. They favored defenders who know the layout. During Queen Marie's renovation in the 1920s, Lehmann maintained these staircases rather than widening them, preserving the medieval character even as he added modern comfort. The result is a building that requires you to move carefully, slowly, aware of the architecture's original hostility to outsiders. The secret passages are real, not myth. The hidden staircase discovered during renovation connected the 1st and 3rd floors, concealed behind a fireplace. It served as an escape route if the castle was breached.
Other passages may still exist, undiscovered. Medieval fortresses routinely included hidden routes for precisely this reason. When defense fails, escape becomes the final option. The architecture planned for both.
The additions from the 1920s blend surprisingly well. Lehmann's timber framing softens the stone without undermining the fortress aesthetic. The loggias and terraces open the building to light and air, making it livable without erasing its military origins. The elevator shaft carved through the well is a remarkable piece of engineering, threading modern technology through medieval infrastructure. The tiled stoves, the electrical wiring, the plumbing, all were added carefully, preserving the character while updating the function. The building reflects its transformations. You can see where arrow slits were widened into windows. You can see where defensive walls were opened for terraces. You can see where residential comfort was imposed on military severity. The architecture is palimpsest, each era leaving marks on the structure without fully erasing what came before. The hospital buildings at the base of the cliff are mostly gone now, demolished or repurposed. But photographs from the 1940s show them clearly, simple, functional structures designed to treat the wounded efficiently. Princess Ileana's hospital was not ornamental, it was operational. The architecture served medicine, not symbolism. The contrast with the castle above is striking. Beauty and pragmatism, side by side, serving different purposes in the same crisis. The current museum configuration preserves the layout, but changes the meaning. Rooms that once served as private chambers for Queen Marie now display furniture and artifacts for tourists. The chapel dedicated to Prince Mircea remains, but it is now part of the tour route, open to strangers who take photographs and move on. The spaces that once held intimate grief and private memory are now public, performative, part of the consumption of history. The restoration work since restitution has been professional and careful. The structure is maintained, damage is repaired. The castle will likely stand for centuries more if the preservation continues. But preservation changes meaning. A building maintained as a museum is not the same as a building lived in, used, inhabited. The castle is more stable now than it was in the 1940s. It is also more static. It no longer changes, adapts, responds to the needs of those who occupy it. It is frozen at the moment of its museum transformation, a snapshot of multiple eras made permanent.
Stand in the courtyard. Look up at the towers. The stone is the same stone the Saxons quarried and lifted in the 14th century. The walls are the same walls that held against Ottoman sieges. The well is the same well that sustained garrisons through long winters. The physical structure has extraordinary continuity. The meaning has none. The castle was a customs fortress, then abandoned, then a royal residence, then a hospital, then a state museum, then a private museum. The stone outlasts every purpose humans assign to it. This is what buildings do. They endure longer than the reasons they were built. The architecture becomes evidence of intentions, values, fears, aspirations that no longer exist. Bran Castle was built to defend and extract profit. It was transformed to provide refuge and beauty. It was adapted to heal and serve. It was seized to serve ideology and generate revenue. It was restored to preserve heritage and profit from tourism. Each purpose was real when it was operational. Each is now history. The stone remembers all of them and none of them. The tourists who walk through Bran today see architecture. Most do not see archaeology. They admire the towers, the courtyard, the timber framing. Few think about the labor that quarried the stone, mixed the mortar, hauled materials up the cliff. Few think about the workers who installed the electrical systems in the 1920s, or the nurses who treated the wounded in the 1940s. The building is beautiful. The building is also a document of work that has been rendered invisible by time and by deliberate erasure. The architecture of Bran Castle reveals the instability of purpose and the permanence of structure. It shows that buildings outlast their builders, their owners, their intended uses. It shows that meaning is imposed, not inherent. And it shows that stone is honest in a way humans are not. The castle cannot lie about what it is. It can only be what it has been made to be. The lies come from the stories told about it, not from the walls themselves.
The question that haunts Bran Castle is not whether it is beautiful. It is. The question is whether beauty alone justifies the systems that produce it. Queen Marie's transformation of Bran in the 1920s created something genuinely beautiful. The combination of medieval architecture and royal comfort, the integration of Romanian folk art with European sophistication, the careful attention to color and texture. It worked aesthetically. The castle became a masterpiece of design, a place where history and art coexisted harmoniously. Marie had vision, taste, resources, and the determination to execute her vision completely. The result was extraordinary. But the resources that made that transformation possible came from centuries of accumulated royal wealth, extracted through systems of monarchy, colonialism, and inequality. Marie did not personally create that wealth. She inherited it. She used it to create beauty. The connection is direct. The beauty at Bran was funded by structures of power that concentrated resources in royal hands while denying them to millions of others. Does Marie's genuine love for Bran, her artistic vision, her relatively kind treatment of staff change that calculation? Yes and no. It makes her sympathetic. It makes her human. It demonstrates that people within exploitative systems can still create genuine good. But it does not erase the system. Marie was a compassionate individual operating within a structure that was fundamentally unequal. Both facts must be acknowledged. Princess Ileana's hospital was unambiguously good. It treated over 1,000 patients. It saved lives. It provided care without regard to political affiliation or social status. Ileana worked as a nurse, physically caring for the wounded. Her service was real, costly, and effective. The hospital was an act of genuine compassion during a catastrophic war. But the hospital existed because Ileana inherited a castle from her mother, who had inherited royal wealth. The hospital was funded partly by one of Romania's wealthiest industrialists. The resources that made the hospital possible came from the same systems of wealth concentration that created inequality in the first place. Charity funded by wealth extracted through unequal systems is better than no charity. It is not the same as justice. The hospital was admirable. It was also insufficient to change the structures that made such charity necessary. The communist seizure of Bran in 1948 was justified ideologically as redistribution of wealth from the aristocracy to the people. The ideology had a point. Concentrated wealth in the hands of royal families while millions lived in poverty is indefensible. Monarchy as a system concentrates power and resources unjustly. The communists were right about the diagnosis. But the treatment was worse than the disease. The communist regime in Romania imprisoned, tortured, and murdered hundreds of thousands of people. It destroyed families. It eliminated political freedom. It created a surveillance state that punished dissent with brutality. It seized property illegally, without due process or compensation. It rewrote history to serve political purposes. The regime claimed to act for the people while denying those same people basic rights and freedoms. The hypocrisy was profound. Seizing Bran Castle and forcing Princess Ileana into exile was not justice. It was theft backed by state violence. Ileana had provided genuine service through the hospital.
She had treated wounded soldiers and advocated for prisoners. The regime rewarded her service with persecution. This was not redistribution. It was brutality masquerading as ideology. And what did the people of Romania gain? They gained access to a museum that told them lies about their own history. They gained tourism revenue that flowed to a government that denied them political freedom. They gained a Dracula myth that erased the truth of what had happened at Bran. They did not gain justice. They gained a different form of exploitation, one that claimed to serve their interests while serving the interests of the state. After 1989, the restitution of Bran to the Habsburg heirs was legally correct. The seizure had been illegal under communist law, let alone under any conception of justice. Returning illegally seized property to its rightful owners is appropriate. But restitution created tension. Many Romanians struggled economically in the chaotic post-communist transition, watching wealthy aristocrats reclaim castles, while ordinary people faced poverty, felt unjust, even if the law supported it. The current arrangement, private ownership with museum operations, is pragmatic. The family benefits from property value and tourism income. The public benefits from access to the castle and the economic activity tourism generates. But the distribution of benefit is unequal. Wealth still concentrates. The families who can reclaim castles are not the families who suffered most under communism. The workers who maintain the museum today are paid wages, but they do not own the property. The pattern continues.
So what do you build when you know the ground beneath is contested? You build knowing the structure will outlast your purposes. You build knowing future generations will reinterpret, repurpose, claim it for themselves. You build knowing that beauty does not exist outside of systems of power, that art requires resources, that resources are never distributed equally. You build accepting that your choices will be judged by people who did not face your constraints and do not share your context. Queen Marie built refuge. She succeeded. For herself, for a time, she created a place of peace and beauty. That success was real. It was also limited. The refuge did not survive her death by long. Her daughter inherited the castle and lost it within a decade. The beauty Marie created was stripped away by a regime that saw it as evidence of inequality rather than achievement. The refuge became a museum, then a lie, then a museum again. The building survived. The purpose did not. Princess Ileana built a hospital. She succeeded. The hospital treated the wounded. It saved lives. And then it was seized, and Ileana was exiled, and the hospital was closed, and the building was repurposed. The service was real. The outcome was loss. Good intentions and genuine effort are not sufficient to overcome historical forces larger than individual virtue. The Saxons built a fortress. They succeeded completely. The fortress stood for centuries, served its military and economic purposes, generated wealth, protected trade. And then the border moved, and the customs point was relocated, and the fortress became obsolete. The Saxons got exactly what they paid for, and it lasted longer than most investments. But eventually, time erased the purpose while preserving the structure. Every builder at Bran, Saxon merchants, Queen Marie, Princess Ileana, acted rationally within their context. None of them could see the future. None of them controlled the historical forces that would ultimately determine whether their purposes survived. They built with vision, resources, and hope, and the castle outlasted all their intentions, becoming something none of them anticipated. This is the nature of historical permanence. Buildings endure. Purposes dissolve. The stone carries the marks of everyone who shaped it, but it serves whoever controls it now, and control shifts based on power, not virtue, not merit, not justice. Power. The Dracula myth has become so dominant that most people cannot see Bran Castle clearly. The vampire fiction is not just marketing, it is a barrier to understanding. It allows tourists to visit without confronting anything difficult. They can enjoy the Gothic atmosphere, buy the souvenirs, take the photos, and leave without thinking about wealth, labor, power, or history. The myth is comfortable, the truth is not. This matters because buildings like Bran Castle are evidence. They document how societies organize resources, distribute wealth, create beauty, justify inequality. When the evidence is buried under fiction, the lessons are lost. When tourists believe they are visiting Dracula's lair instead of a Saxon fortress that became a royal refuge, that became a hospital that was seized by communists, they leave without understanding anything important about how power operates. The tours at Bran have improved. The exhibits now include substantial information about Queen Marie and Princess Ileana. The historical accuracy is better than it was under communist rule. But the Dracula marketing still dominates because it generates tourism, and tourism funds operations, and operations require money. The economic logic is clear, and it is still dishonest. The question is whether honesty matters. Does it matter that tourists believe a lie if the lie generates revenue that preserves the castle? Does it matter that the fiction eclipses the history if the building survives? Does preservation justify distortion? These are not rhetorical questions. They have no obvious answers. Preservation is important. Buildings are cultural heritage, architectural achievement, historical evidence. Letting them decay would be a loss. But preserving the building while erasing its history is its own kind of loss. You save the structure while destroying the meaning. The stone endures, the truth disappears. Some will argue that most tourists do not care about the truth. They want entertainment, not education. They want to say they visited Dracula's castle, not that they learned about Saxon trade economics or royal restitution law. The marketing meets them where they are. This is pragmatic. It is also condescending. It assumes audiences cannot handle complexity. It assumes they prefer fiction to truth. Sometimes that assumption is correct. Sometimes it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
The current museum at Bran walks an uncomfortable line. It markets Dracula to attract visitors. It provides historical information for visitors who want it. The compromise satisfies no one completely. Those who want pure historical accuracy are frustrated by the vampire merchandise. Those who want pure Gothic fantasy are bored by the exhibits about Queen Marie. The museum tries to serve both audiences and fully serves neither. But perhaps that discomfort is appropriate. Perhaps the tension between fiction and history, between entertainment and education, between profit and truth, is exactly what Bran Castle should represent. The building itself embodies contradiction. It was built for war and transformed for peace. It was a royal sanctuary and a people's hospital. It was seized in the name of workers and sold to tourists as vampire kitsch. Every phase of its history contains irreconcilable tensions. Why should the present be different? The castle stands, the tourists come, the revenue flows, the preservation continues, the fiction dominates, the truth competes. Both exist simultaneously. The question is not whether one should eliminate the other. The question is whether audiences can be trusted with complexity, whether institutions will prioritize honesty alongside profit, whether history matters enough to fight for, even when myth sells better. Bran Castle survived 7 centuries by adapting to whoever controlled it. It served Saxons, Hungarians, Transylvanians, Romanians, royalty, communists, and now private owners operating a public museum. It will likely survive longer by continuing to adapt. The building itself has no loyalty except to its own survival. The humans who occupy it choose what stories to tell about it. Those choices reveal what we value. Do we value truth, or do we value whatever generates the most revenue? Do we believe audiences deserve honesty, or do we believe they prefer comfortable lies?
The answer is visible in the gift shops. Plastic fangs, vampire capes, Dracula mugs. The merchandise does not lie about what the institution prioritizes. The castle is evidence. The souvenir shops are confession. Walk through Bran Castle today, and you will pass hundreds of other tourists. They move through rooms in groups, guided or self-guided, cameras ready, seeking the perfect photo. They stand in the courtyard. They climb the staircases. They look out from the terraces at the valleys below. Most will spend 90 minutes to 2 hours in the castle. Most will leave believing they visited Dracula's home. Watch them carefully. Notice what they look at. They photograph the architecture, the stone walls, the wooden balconies, the towers. They photograph each other posing in medieval doorways. They photograph the courtyard well. They move through the rooms where exhibits display furniture, armor, historical artifacts. Some read the placards, most do not. They are here for the experience, not the education. The experience is enough. What do they not see? They do not see the workers who maintain the museum, the staff who clean the floors, repair the stonework, replace light bulbs, trim the gardens. These workers are present but invisible, the way service workers are always invisible when you train yourself not to notice them. The tourists see the castle. They do not see the labor that keeps it functioning. They do not see the history of labor that made the castle possible. The Saxon workers who hauled stone in the 14th century, the craftsmen who installed the timber framing in the 1920s, the electricians who wired the building, the nurses who treated patients in the 1940s, the museum staff who maintain it now. All of it is invisible unless you deliberately choose to see it. They do not see the complexity of ownership, the contested history of who controlled the castle and how that control shifted, the Saxon investment, the Hungarian and Transylvanian administration, the royal gift and transformation, the communist seizure, the post-communist restitution, the current private ownership operating a public museum. These layers exist, but the tours do not emphasize them. The tourists leave without understanding that ownership is always contested, always political, always reflecting power rather than justice.
They do not see the refugees, Princess Ileana kneeling in the snow with villagers, praying before exile. The hundreds of thousands of Romanians who fled or were expelled or were imprisoned under communism. The diaspora that formed across the world, carrying memories of a country they could not return to. The personal costs of political transformation. The tours do not mention this. The history is too recent, too painful, too complicated. They do not see the wealth extraction that funded the castle's transformations, the colonial enterprises and dynastic accumulations that filled royal treasuries, the customs duties collected at the pass, the tourism revenue that flows now. The castle has always been an economic machine, extracting value from those who pass through it. The form changes, the function persists. They do not see the alternative histories, what Bran Castle might have become if Queen Marie had refused the gift, if Princess Ileana had not been exiled, if the communist regime had been less brutal or more honest, if the Dracula marketing had never been invented, if the restitution had included broader economic justice for all who suffered under communism, not just property returns for those who could prove legal ownership. Every historical moment contains paths not taken. The tourists see only what happened, not what might have been. And perhaps that is appropriate. Buildings show what was built, not what could have been. Bran Castle is evidence of the choices that were made. To build a fortress, to transform it into a home, to turn it into a hospital, to seize it, to market it as Dracula's lair. Each choice was made by people with power, making decisions that served their interests. The workers who built it, the staff who maintained it, the refugees who were expelled from it, the citizens who were denied truth about it. They had no power. Their interests were not considered. This is the pattern. The tourists leave satisfied.
They got what they came for: a castle, an experience, photos to prove they were here. Most will forget the details within weeks. The building will remain in their memory as atmosphere, not history. Gothic, medieval, vampire adjacent. The myth they believed when they arrived is the myth they leave with. The castle reinforced what they already thought. This is also the pattern. But some tourists ask better questions. Some read the exhibits carefully. Some notice the invisible labor. Some understand that buildings are evidence of power, not monuments to achievement. Some leave uncomfortable, uncertain, troubled by what they learned. These tourists are rare, but they exist, and for them, Bran Castle becomes something different. Not entertainment, evidence, not fantasy, history, not simple, complex. The castle cannot control how visitors see it. It can only stand, solid and beautiful, displaying what centuries of human choices have made it. The meaning is imposed by whoever looks. The stone is neutral. The interpretation is not.
Return to the question from the beginning. What do you build when you know the ground beneath is contested? You build knowing that ground will shift. You build knowing your purposes will not survive. You build accepting that the structure will outlast your intentions and serve purposes you never imagined. And you build anyway, because the alternative is to build nothing, to create nothing, to leave no mark at all. The Saxons built Bran Castle knowing the border was dangerous, trade was profitable, and security required stone. They built for clear reasons. They got exactly what they wanted for centuries. Eventually, the border moved, the customs point relocated, and the fortress became obsolete. The purpose dissolved. The building remained. They built something that outlasted their needs. That is success, even if the success is temporary. Queen Marie built a sanctuary knowing she needed refuge from court formalities and political pressures. She built for herself, for beauty, for peace. She got exactly what she wanted for the time she had. When she died, her vision died with her. Her daughter inherited the building, but not the peace. The communists seized both. Marie built something beautiful that lasted only a few decades in its intended form. That is failure if you measure by permanence. That is success if you measure by the genuine peace she experienced while it lasted. Princess Ileana's hospital was funded by inherited wealth and donated capital. The service was real. The funding came from accumulated privilege. Wealth creates the possibility of both exploitation and charity. Sometimes it creates both simultaneously. What Bran Castle reveals about class is that separation is built into the architecture. Separate staircases for servants, separate entrances, separate spaces. The building physically enforces hierarchy. This was intentional. The design reflected social structures that assumed fundamental inequality between those who owned and those who served. When Queen Marie renovated, she maintained those separations even as she modernized the space. The staircases remained separate. The hierarchy remained encoded in stone. Class is not abstract, it is architectural. What Bran Castle reveals about power is that it determines ownership regardless of justice. The Saxons built the castle and controlled it through investment and legal privilege. The Hungarians controlled it through royal authority. The city of Brașov controlled it through debt settlement. Queen Marie controlled it through gift and wealth. Princess Ileana controlled it through inheritance. The communists controlled it through force. The Habsburg heirs control it through legal restitution. Each transfer reflected power, not right. Some transfers were more just than others. None were inevitable. Power shaped every outcome. What Bran Castle reveals about labor is that it is systematically erased.
The workers who built the fortress, who renovated the palace, who ran the hospital, who maintained the museum, most of their names are lost. The records preserve owners, architects, royal family members. The records do not preserve the mason who laid stone, the carpenter who framed timber, the nurse who changed bandages, the custodian who sweeps floors. This is not accidental. This is the structure. Labor makes wealth possible. Credit goes elsewhere. The pattern repeats across centuries. What Bran Castle reveals about truth is that it competes with fiction, and fiction often wins. The Dracula myth is false. It is also more famous than any true fact about Bran. The myth generates tourism. Tourism funds preservation. Preservation maintains the structure. The lie saves the building. But it also erases the history. The castle survives at the cost of truth. That trade-off is not neutral. It is a choice that reveals what institutions value. What Bran Castle reveals about beauty is that it does not exist outside systems of power. Marie created something genuinely beautiful at Bran. The beauty was real. The resources that made it possible came from systems of profound inequality. Both facts are true. Beauty created through exploitation is still beautiful. Exploitation used to create beauty is still exploitation. The two truths exist simultaneously. Acknowledging one does not erase the other.
What Bran Castle reveals about history is that it never resolves cleanly. There are no heroes at Bran. There are no villains. There are people making choices within constraints, some choices better than others, all of them limited by context and power. Queen Marie was compassionate within a system of inequality. Princess Ileana served genuinely within a structure of privilege. The communists claimed justice while committing brutality. The current owners preserve heritage while marketing fiction. Everyone acts with mixed motives. Everyone creates mixed outcomes. Complexity is the only honest framework. Stand in the courtyard of Bran Castle. Look up at the towers. The stone is the same stone quarried in the 1370s. The walls have held for 7 centuries. The well still draws water. The structure has survived Saxons, Hungarians, Transylvanians, Romanians, Queens, communists, tourists. It will likely survive whatever comes next. The building is permanent in a way purposes are not. But the building is also empty in a way it never was when people lived here, when Queen Marie painted in her studio, when Princess Ileana treated patients in the hospital, when the Saxons collected customs at the pass. The castle was alive then, functioning, serving purposes that mattered to the people who inhabited it. Now it is a museum. The rooms are staged. The furniture is mostly not original. The spaces are for looking, not living. The castle has been preserved by being frozen. It no longer changes, adapts, responds to need. It is more stable than it has ever been. It is also more static. Is that success? The building survives. The history is partially preserved. Tourism generates revenue. Employment is created. The alternative, decay, collapse, loss, would clearly be worse. Preservation is better than destruction, but preservation at the cost of truth or life or meaning is its own kind of loss. The castle is saved, the complexity is simplified, the myth dominates, the labor is invisible, the tourists leave satisfied, and the stone holds all of it, truth and fiction, beauty and exploitation, service and seizure, without judgment, without preference, without capacity to speak. Buildings do not choose their stories. People do. The choices made about Bran Castle to market Dracula, to simplify the history, to erase some truths while highlighting others, reveal what people value: entertainment over education, profit over honesty, simplicity over complexity.
These are choices, not inevitabilities. Different choices are possible. Different stories could be told. The stone can hold truth as easily as fiction. It simply holds whatever humans decide to place upon it.
Bran Castle today operates as a successful museum. Over 500,000 visitors pass through annually. The revenue funds ongoing preservation and provides income for the Habsburg heirs and employment for the region. The structure is well maintained. The exhibits are professionally curated. The tours are efficient. By most measures, the current system works. But what story does the museum tell? Walk through it carefully. The medieval history is present. The Saxon construction, the fortress function, the customs operations. Queen Marie receives substantial attention now. Her transformation of the castle, her aesthetic vision, her love for Bran, it is all explained, exhibited, honored. Princess Ileana appears in the exhibits. Her hospital is mentioned. Her exile is acknowledged, though briefly. The communist seizure is described. The restitution is explained. And then there is Dracula. The vampire is everywhere. The gift shops overflow with fangs, capes, plastic stakes, coffins. The marketing materials emphasize the Gothic atmosphere. The promotional photos lean into shadows and mystery. Tour groups are told about Vlad the Impaler's tenuous connection to the region. The fiction is presented alongside the history as though they are equally valid, equally important, equally true. They are not. One is history, one is fantasy. Presenting them together without clear distinction is dishonest. It suggests that the Dracula connection has historical legitimacy when it does not. It allows tourists to believe a myth while thinking they are learning history. The museum has improved in recent years, adding more historical accuracy, but it has not abandoned the fiction, because the fiction sells. This is the compromise modern heritage sites make constantly. They need revenue to survive. Revenue comes from tourism. Tourism requires marketing. Marketing requires simplification. Simplification distorts truth. Distortion generates revenue. Revenue funds preservation. The cycle perpetuates itself. The alternative, tell the full truth, reject the myth, accept lower tourism numbers, might result in less funding, which might result in deterioration, which might result in loss. The economic logic is clear, and it still feels wrong. What would an honest museum at Bran look like? It would eliminate the Dracula marketing entirely, or relegate it to a single exhibit explaining how the myth was created and why it is false. It would dedicate substantial space to the invisible labor that made the castle possible. It would name workers where records allow. It would explain wage structures, working conditions, the architecture of separation. It would examine the wealth that funded Marie's transformation, tracing it back through generations of royal accumulation. It would give Princess Ileana's hospital the prominence it deserves, not as a footnote, but as a central chapter. It would explore the communist seizure in detail, the ideology, the brutality, the lies told afterward. It would examine restitution honestly, acknowledging both the legal correctness and the economic tensions it created. An honest museum would be uncomfortable. It would not provide easy heroes or villains. It would not offer tidy moral lessons. It would force visitors to confront complexity, inequality, the mechanics of how beauty gets created and maintained. It would trust audiences to handle difficult truths. It would prioritize education over entertainment, and it would probably attract fewer visitors, generate less revenue, and struggle to justify its operations economically. This is the trap. Honesty is expensive. Fiction is profitable. The building needs resources to survive. Resources come from visitors. Visitors come for fiction. The fiction saves the building while erasing its history. The museum succeeds by the metrics that matter to museums: visitor numbers, revenue, preservation budgets, while failing by the metrics that matter to truth.
Both realities exist simultaneously. The tourists leave. They board buses back to Brașov or Bucharest. They carry photos, souvenirs, memories. They tell friends they visited Dracula's castle. The myth spreads. The truth stays within the walls, available to those who look for it, but not imposed on those who prefer comfortable fantasy. The castle continues to function exactly as it has for decades now. The system works. The lie persists. The stone holds all of it without complaint. But ask better questions. Was it worth it? The centuries of construction, transformation, service, seizure, preservation, did they produce something valuable enough to justify the costs? Who benefited from Bran Castle across its history? The Saxons got security and profit for centuries. Queen Marie got refuge and beauty for years. Princess Ileana got a hospital that saved lives. The communists got tourism revenue. The current owners get property value and income. The tourists get access to history and architecture. The local economy gets employment and investment. The tourists leave. They board buses back to Brașov or Bucharest. They carry photos, souvenirs, memories. They tell friends they visited Dracula's castle. The myth spreads. The truth stays within the walls, available to those who look for it, but not imposed on those who prefer comfortable fantasy. The castle continues to function exactly as it has for decades now. The system works. The lie persists. The stone holds all of it without complaint.
Who paid? The Saxon workers who built it? The staff who maintained it under royal ownership? The patients and nurses who served during war? The princess who lost her home? The citizens denied truth under communism? The workers who maintain it now? The pattern is clear. Those with capital and power benefit most. Those with labor and need pay most. The distribution has never been equal. It has never been just. It has always reflected power structures that concentrate benefit upward and distribute cost downward. Could it have been different? Perhaps. If the Saxons had organized construction as a collective rather than an investment by merchant class. If Queen Marie had refused the gift and insisted it serve public purposes immediately. If Princess Ileana had been allowed to keep the hospital running under different political conditions. If the communists had genuinely redistributed wealth rather than concentrating it in state hands. If the restitution had included broader economic justice alongside property returns. If the current museum prioritized truth over profit. Each moment contained possibilities. Each moment chose power over alternatives. Should it have been different? That is for you to answer. The castle is evidence. The history is documented. The patterns are visible. The choices were made. The outcomes are known. Whether those outcomes were justified, whether the costs were acceptable, whether the beauty created was worth the exploitation required, these are questions the castle cannot answer. Only people can answer them, and people rarely agree. The castle stands. The towers rise above the gorge. The walls hold as they have for 7 centuries. The tourists come, take photos, leave, satisfied. The workers maintain, clean, guide, remain mostly invisible. The owners profit. The state collects taxes. The region benefits economically. The myth dominates. The truth competes. Beauty and exploitation coexist. History and fiction blur. Power and labor remain separate. The pattern continues. And time moves forward, patient and relentless, erasing purposes while preserving structures, dissolving meanings while maintaining walls, outlasting every builder and every story anyone tells about what they built. The castle will stand long after everyone who currently visits it has died. It will stand until time or catastrophe brings it down. It will hold whatever stories future generations choose to tell about it.
The stone does not care. The stone simply is.
But we should care, because the stone is evidence, and evidence reveals what we choose to acknowledge and what we choose to ignore, what we honor and what we erase, what we preserve and what we let die. The choices made about Bran Castle, across centuries, across political systems, across the present moment, reveal what humans value when forced to choose between truth and profit, between complexity and simplification, between honoring labor and celebrating wealth. The castle is a mirror. What you see depends on how closely you look. Most tourists see vampires. Some see queens. Few see workers. Almost none see systems. The building holds all of it. The question is what you choose to seek, and whether what you find will change how you see power, wealth, beauty, labor, truth. The walls still stand. The question remains. And the answer, if there is one, lives not in the stone, but in the choices people make about what the stone means and whose stories it should tell.